Friday, June 12th, 2026. Listen to this analysis.
Obviously, John Heilman, a revolt in this country if those numbers are accurate. I did notice that the president didn't talk about sanctions relief. He didn't talk about the so-called reconstruction dollars that he'd been talking about for quite some time. I just look at these numbers that Michael just talked about. You're at about $325 billion that the Iranians would be paid just to go into negotiations for 6 months. I want to remind everybody the great meltdown among all Republicans regarding Barack Obama's pallets of cash was $400 million. I want to underline this. Maybe somebody can tell me how much more, as far as multiplying goes, $325 billion is than 400 million, right? What is it, 100 times more? At least 100 times more. And this reminds me so much of when people were talking about the Biden crime family and the corruption, that Hunter may have taken a trip on Air Force Two once and introduced Daddy to a business partner when he was vice president. Comparing that to what's going on now, our Burisma, Hunter getting a $3 million fee, which he may have, I don't know, maybe made $1 million, $1.5 million from it after it was all over, are selling his NFTs or selling his art for $50,000 or $100,000. And now you've got $4 billion in personal wealth accumulated by the Trumps over the first 18 months of the second term. So again, it's multipliers. And John, you tell me, who is going to support a plan that will give any reconstruction money to the Iranians, that will give any sanctions relief to the Iranians, especially if it's $325 billion, which is basically just ransom money for them to stop holding the president and stop holding America hostage in this war.
Well, I don't know about that, Joe. I think certainly there are going to be people on the right, as Michael said, who are going to be adamantly opposed to any such deal, although those people are so enthralled to Trump that maybe they'll try to figure out some way to cloak those payments and make them palatable, not to use a pun here about pallets, but there are a lot of people in the Republican Party and a fair number of people in the Democratic Party who are desperate to bring this conflict to an end, and so desperate because the politics are so bad for Republicans, and because Democrats think that the war is so bad for the country and for the world that there may be people who are willing to accept this deal, these kinds of terms, that kind of cash. Again, if it's dressed up in the right way. I've heard people saying from almost the outset of the war that in the end, this is how it would come to an end, that there would have to be a bunch of reconstruction money that would go back to Iran, and that it would be politically unpalatable, but that people would have to ultimately swallow it. I want to focus on one other thing, though, Joe, which is that the other thing we never hear about that's not discussed is now in all these negotiations that are deals that are not deals, memorandums of understanding that would create ceasefires and then push all the hard issues to later, is a resolution of the Iranian nuclear issue, which after weeks of Donald Trump not being able to explain why we'd gone to war in Iran in the first place, he finally decided, almost to a comical level, to settle on they cannot have a nuclear weapon, they cannot have a nuclear weapon, they cannot have a nuclear weapon. He says it over and over and over again. And in every one of these deals that turns out to not be a deal, the nuclear issue is kicked down the road and to be negotiated later. So the ludicrousness of Trump saying yesterday, we have ended the war, when the largest issue, according to Donald Trump, on the table is that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, has never been addressed, has never been resolved, has never been negotiated, and is still something we're going to talk about on another day, is thrown into even higher relief, the ludicrousness, that is, of that claim, which is not that, hey, we have a deal that I like, but that we've ended the war. That's what Trump said yesterday. We've ended the war. We ended the...
So, a very interesting analysis.